Hi, I'm Steve Shaffer, and we're going to continue our reading in John, beginning in chapter 6, starting in verse 25. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here?" Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. Do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. On him, God the Father has placed his seal of approval." Then they asked him, "What must we do to do the works that God requires?" Jesus answered, "The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent." So they asked him, "What sign will you give, that we may see it and believe you? What will you do?" "Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "always give us this bread." This is an interesting section, and it continues the theme in John of misunderstanding. The crowd continued to focus on bread as a source of food, like they did in the feeding miracle, and for ease of life. But Jesus is talking about fulfillment of life, eternal life, and he distinguishes it on the basis of faith. The language of this section has many Old Testament backgrounds. The first is Amos 8, which may not be visible so much here, but at the end of our last section, the crowd is going back and forth from one side of the lake to the other. And in Amos 8, it talks about wandering to and fro, looking for something, but never finding it. But the main background for this section is Isaiah 55, especially 55 verse 2, where it talks about bread and food that is eternal and satisfying. We have another reference to the fact that food that spoils is also a reference back to the manna from heaven, which was important as an Exodus reference. The manna would spoil if you kept it over to the next day. So here Jesus is making an allusion to the fact that he himself, the bread from heaven, the manna from above, is offering food that will not spoil. It doesn't have to be collected day after day. It's eternal bread. There's another dual meaning aspect to this section as well, and that comes into the idea of work. Work as a word changes in meaning as it moves through this passage. It begins with the idea of labor in 27, but then it changes to the idea of religious performance in 28, and then Jesus modifies it once again to speak of faith in verse 29. Continuing in verse 35, we'll read, "Then Jesus declared, 'I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. All whom the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never drive away. For I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I shall lose none of them, all those he has given me, but raise them up at the last day. For my Father's will is that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day.' At this, the Jews began to grumble about him, because he said, 'I am the bread that came down from heaven.' They said, 'Is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, 'I came down from heaven'?" Jesus is the bread of life. We have an I am statement. I am the bread of life. This is the bread, if you eat it, that you will never hunger and never thirst. This is echoing again Isaiah 55 and the fulfillment, the messianic fulfillment prophecies. It also lies in parallel with the discussion that Jesus had with the woman at the well in Samaria, the living water. Here we have eternal bread. So Jesus is the response to Jesus is the key in this passage. And he speaks of a response using a variety of words. Words like, come to me, who has seen me, who looks to the Son. All of these things emphasize that the key question of the passage is, how will you respond to what you have seen and heard? How will you respond to the bread of heaven? There's an emphasis here on that everyone is invited. In verse 40 it says that this is God's will, that everyone. And this everyone echoes what was said in chapter 1 verse 12. Yet to all who did receive him, he gave the power to become children of God, born of God. To all who receive. The emphasis is not on the limited revelation, but on the response. God will reveal himself to all. Jesus invites all. The question is, how will we respond to what we have seen and heard? And that's where this language of grumbling then gets introduced to the text. Grumbling is a clear echo back to the Israelites in the wilderness. In Exodus and in Numbers, Exodus 15 and 16, and in Numbers 11 and 14, we have a continuing mention of the fact that the Israelites grumbled. They grumbled over the manna. They grumbled over the quail. They grumbled over lack of water. They grumbled over all that God did for them. That grumbling is a way of summarizing their lack of faith, their lack of response to what they were seeing and hearing in Jesus.